Hey you legends, today we're going to be having a look at the dip ink pen, the ink dip pen that I use. So I'm just trying to line her up here. I went to open it and I've mucked up all the nibs. The main ink dip pen I use is this one by Mont Marte. Now it's $8.20 from my local, it's called Stacks. It's like a $2 shop, but it's not as cheap as a $2 shop. Do you know what I mean? So they've got kind of everything there. It's a Bitsa shop. So I got this. It comes with it comes with 9 nibs, and this, but you can put other nibs in too. I'm fairly certain the nib I use the most is actually not one of these ones, because I just realized when I took it out to actually start using these that it's not actually included in this pack. So we're going to go through each of the nibs in this pack and just have a look and see what they're like, what do they do, which ones might be good for doing some loose expressive drawing. Who knows where we'll go. So I'm going to do a drawing for every single nib. I'll speed her up a little bit, put a bit of a voiceover on, and hopefully you have a great time. If you feel the need, feel free to like and subscribe before going any further. That would be amazing. Excuse me, dodgy bun over here. It's quite hard. It's all over the shop today. But anyway, let's do it. Mont Marte Calligraphy dip pen set. Let's try her out. Welcome from a future slightly less croaky Courtney. Now my apologies about the game. I completely forgot it was still playing in the corner there. Okay, here's our first nib, if you will. It's called a Cartooning Fine 001. Now this one I didn't think I would like, because I like laying down a lot of ink. But in the end, I actually really liked it. I didn't have to ink up very often, and the flow was fairly consistent. The only downside I found was that I couldn't get much variations in line width and mark making, but really was quite happy with the sketchy look of the drawing in the end. So this cow actually turned out pretty well, I thought. Probably not a great nib for larger artworks, but great for these little tiny sketchbook sketches. Okay, and here is nib number 2. It's pretty much the same one, so it's a Cartooning Medium 003. So they kind of come in groups of three different sizes of the same nib. So I went into this nib thinking I would like it even more, because I thought, well, if I like the little one, maybe the larger one's easier to get variations in my mark, which was true. There is definitely more variation on how thick I could put down ink, and I could still get super fine lines. But the flow of the ink on this one wasn't as smooth. I'm not ruling it out. It could be user error with this one, but when I tried to get it to put more ink down, I ended up dumping a heap of ink onto the page, like on that beak bit there, like in a blob, which I found really annoying. I like being able to control when it blobs and when it doesn't, to an extent. I also had to ink up this nib really quite often too, which I find a bit of a pain in the bottom. Here we go, nib number 3. This is the Cartooning Bold, so it's the larger of the cartooning nibs in the pack. I loved this nib. I really loved it. The two halves of the nib that meet at the point, the tip, were so flexible. So what this meant is I could easily get a fine line when I wanted to, when they were together, but when I wanted a thicker line, I just had to apply a little bit of pressure and they would separate and I could get a really nice, cool, thick line for that one. And I found it really easy to control. I even got some fancy in this one and did a little bit of a twisty twist at one point to vary my marks. And when I do that type of thing, I kind of lose a bit of that control, which is okay sometimes, not all the time. So I really liked that I could do that. I did have to ink it up quite regularly, but because of the control I had with this one, I didn't mind so much. It was just easy to use with minimal pressure. Nib number 4. This is the first of the 3 traditional calligraphy nibs, and it's a traditional calligraphy fine 005. It's a number 5, I think. So the 5 means it's smaller. I found this nib not as enjoyable to use. I could get thicker lines by using the nib flat because it had like kind of a flat edge on the end of it, and then thinner by just holding the nib on the side. So it was easier to do that, but I found it really hard to get anything in between thin or thick. I didn't have to re-dip often, but I found I was pressing quite hard to get a faster flow of ink, to actually get that ink down. In saying this, I think that all 3 of these calligraphy nibs would actually be brilliant with actual traditional calligraphy. Just a bit more exploration is needed for my application. Also, shout out to Tank, my mate's Great Dane that I photographed for this reference. Woot woot. Okay, nib number 5. Don't know why I did that voice, but anyway. This is the traditional calligraphy medium number 3. Some very similar issues with this nib. Great thin lines, great thick lines, but hard to get anything in between. This nib used a lot of ink, and I'll try to explain this next problem as best I can, but no guarantees. Thanks to me. I found it was important to keep this nib filled with ink and not let it run out of ink. What I found would happen if I did let the ink run low, so not out entirely, but just run low, is I would start having to press even harder to try get the prongs to separate to get more ink, which meant that when I did this, I ripped the paper a lot more easily, which happened a small amount with the 5, but more with this one. So it happened a little bit with the smaller one, but more with this one. Does that make sense? I hope so. And here's nib number 6, old Big Bertha Traditional Calligraphy Bold number 1. This is the fat boy. You see it's flat on the end again like the other traditional calligraphy ones. I hated this nib. You will see in this drawing I struggled bad. I just really struggled. It was quite hard to get a thin line or anything thinner than the width of the nib. It was slightly easier to use when you go slower, but that doesn't really suit my drawing style. It also just dropped ink on the page, and so you would you had to dip and re-ink it really frequently. I even abandoned this drawing. Like, I just went, I don't think there's any point doing any more here. Again, I think it would be fantastic for proper traditional calligraphy. Just saying. Nib number 7. So this is the last 3 in the pack. These are all script calligraphy nibs, and this is the fine 1mm one. This nib, or at least these next 3 nibs, I loved them. It was brilliant. It held a lot of ink because there's this like well bit at the top of the nib, just where it would hold more ink, and it didn't need to re-ink very often. This one I put down the ink really smoothly. I think which is because of there's a little foot on the end, where a little flat bit that just kind of glides over the paper really nicely. It was a bit harder to get really thin lines, but still a good amount of variation in marks. I overworked this drawing just because I was just enjoying using this nib so much. Excuse this slightly out of focus here. It's focused on my hand. Come on, Courtney. So here's the second script calligraphy medium, number 2. Well, it's 2mm. I was worried this nib wouldn't live up to its younger, smaller nib friend, the 1mm. But it was just as good. It really had the same qualities as the smaller one, with only one exception. I found it a little harder to get the thin lines, especially when it was loaded with ink. I had to try and accomplish all my thin lines after using up some of the ink in the little well bit, and trying to stretch out the small amount still in the nib. I still loved it though. In saying that, I still loved that. And this drawing here is actually my favourite out of all of these. And you can see there's lots of variation, and I kind of discovered at this point that to get thin lines, you just put it right up on the tip of the foot. So a bit like a ballerina would, right on the tip of its toes, which helped with a lot of that variation of line. Right, here we go. Last nib in the pack is this a script calligraphy bold 4mm. So when I picked up this nib to use, I didn't think I would like it because it was the foot on the top is massive. It's 4mm, for goodness sake. But I loved it. I had to reload the ink a lot because it used a lot more of the ink, but that didn't bother me because I loved the variation of marks. Again, I worried about not getting nice thin lines, but I did the ballerina trick with it, which worked really well. You can see that there in the drawing. It just put down the ink so smooth and was just so fun to use. Yeah, I've got nothing else to say about that one. So here's a little bit of a flick through of all the drawings I did, and my final thoughts. I really loved the script calligraphy bold 4mm was for sure my favourite nib. I would still probably use a mix of the script calligraphy and the cartooning nibs as well, so I can get a variation of all of those marks that I loved. A mix of thick lines, super fine lines, depending really what I would use. The traditional calligraphy nibs are hated, but and I'm going to probably put them in the bin, but if you are a traditional calligrapher, they're probably brilliant for you. So don't take my word on that. I use these for drawing, so it's very different to what they're initially intended for. Also, how good did this little sketchbook go? This is a handmade sketchbook that I made with, I even did the lino printing for the fabric, which super proud of myself. I was just experimenting with some stuff and experimenting with this 110 GSM cartridge paper, and it held up with the ink really well. I've probably at this point got some, not exactly like this, but I've got some other sketchbooks if you would like to purchase your own up on my website. You need to probably hurry, they don't last very long, and because I don't make heaps all at once. So if you'd like one of them, you can head over to my website, which is down in the description. So here you go, here's my little sketchbook from the cover, my lovely little multi-needle Coptic stitch binding, which isn't in focus. Oh, there it is, hello. Thank you so much for watching, thank you for joining in. If you do this as well, tag me over on Instagram. I've got all those details down in the description. I'd love to see what you do in your sketchbook, and lovely little hand dance there. Thanks. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye. Love you, bye. See you, legends. Bye.